According to Wikipedia, typology in Christian theology and in biblical exegesis is a doctrine or theory concerning the relationship of the Old Testament to the New Testament. Typology is very useful for grasping truths about the Catholic faith, because it is both at the same time simple and profound. Through typology, people, places, and events from the Old Testament are seen as a foreshadowing or a prefigurement of people, places, and events in the New Testament. Typology uses storytelling to deepen our understanding about the Catholic faith. And this is much like the approach that our Lord took to explaining truth, as he spoke in parables and in stories so that everyone could understand. Please listen prayerfully and open your hearts to see the typological prefigurements that lie waiting for us in the Old Testament. Before we examine how the period of the Church Fathers was prefigured in the Old Testament by the period of the Judges, I would like to offer an idea. The Old Testament contains the entire history of the Israelites. The Israelites were the Old Testament people of God. Their entire history, from their inception until their ending, is completely contained in the books of the Old Testament. Similarly, the New Testament is the entire history of the new people of God, the Catholic Church. The New Testament really contains our entire history from start to finish. However, the difference is that for the Israelites, their history is entirely recorded in the Bible. Our history is still being lived out. We are still in the New Testament, even though our history is not recorded entirely in the Bible. With that concept in mind, it becomes clear why the period of the Church Fathers would be prefigured in the pages of the Old Testament. If the Old prefigures the New, then events in the history of the Church would be prefigured by the Old Testament. It's not just people, places, and events from the pages of the books of the New Testament, but the actual history of our Church that comprises the actual New Testament. Now we are ready to look at how the period of the Church Fathers is prefigured in the Old Testament by the period of the Judges. The book of Judges tells the story of the Israelites, right after they entered the Promised Land. The Promised Land was filled with many enemy nations. In the book of Deuteronomy, the Lord instructs the nation of Israel to completely eliminate their enemies from the Promised Land, lest those who survive turn the hearts of Israel to foreign gods. From the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 20, verses 16 to 18. But of those cities that thou shalt be given thee, thou shalt suffer none at all to live, but shalt kill them all with the edge of the sword, to wit the Hittite, and the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee, lest they teach you to do all the abominations which they have done to their gods, and you should sin against the Lord your God. Upon entering the Promised Land, certain tribes of Israel did better than others in eliminating their enemies. Many of Israel's enemies were not destroyed, and the tribes of Israel made compromises with them. Soon, Israel was worshiping the false gods of their enemies. The book of Judges contains a cycle that is repeated many times. First, Israel does evil in the sight of God. Second, God delivers them to their enemies. And third, God raises up a leader to save his people. Fourth, their enemies are defeated. And then finally, God's people have a period of peace. The enemies of Israel were numerous, and they threatened Israel at different times and places. The Moabites and the Midianites threatened from the southeast, the Philistines in the southwest, the Amorites come from the north, and the Amalekites and the Edomites threatened Israel from the south. Different judges would rise up at different times and places to defend Israel from their different enemies. In the book of Judges, it is repeated in 3 different verses that in those days there was no king in Israel, but everyone did that which seemed right to himself. Even though the Israelites had the law that was given to them by Moses, there was no central authority. Also, there was no precedent of how they were to live. Now they were free and on their own in their own land. After a judge would save them from their enemies and brought them back to worship of the true God, the Israelites would lapse back into worship of false gods. Because of this, God stated that he would allow Israel to live with her enemies and be tested by them. From the book of Judges, chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. And an angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to the place of weepers, and said, I made you go out of Egypt, and have brought you into the land for which I swore to your fathers. And I promised that I would not make void my covenant with you forever, on condition that you should not make a league with the inhabitants of this land, but you should throw down their altars, and you would not hear my voice. Why have you done this? Wherefore I would not destroy them from before your face, that you may have enemies, and their gods may be your ruin. And again from the 2nd chapter of Judges, verses 11 to 15. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they served Balaam. And they left the Lord the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they followed strange gods, and the gods of the people that dwelt around about them. And they adored them, and they provoked the Lord to anger, forsaking him and serving Baal and Ashtaroth. And the Lord, being angry against Israel, delivered them into the hands of plunderers, who took them and sold them to their enemies, that dwelt around about. Neither could they stand against their enemies. But whithersoever they meant to go, the hand of the Lord was upon them, and as he had said, and as he had sworn to them, and they were greatly distressed. From the 2nd chapter of Judges, verse 16. And the Lord raised up judges to deliver them from the hands of those that oppressed them. From the 2nd chapter of Judges, verses 18 and 19. And when the Lord raised them up judges, in their days he was moved to mercy, and heard the groanings of the afflicted, and delivered them from the slaughter of the oppressors. But after the judge was dead, they returned, and did much worse things than their fathers had done, following strange gods, serving them and adoring them. The book of Judges tells the story of 6 major judges and 6 minor judges. Also, there are 3 other stories in the book of Judges as well. These include the stories of Micah's idol, the slaughter of the Benjaminites, and the story of Gideon's son Abimelech. The 6 major judges are Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson. The 6 minor judges are Shamgar, Tola, Jair, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon. While it would take too long to go over all the stories of the judges, we will touch on the parts of the stories of some of the judges that are relevant to this video. The story of Ehud. King Eglon was oppressing and ruling over the Israelites. King Eglon was ruling over a coalition of Moabites, Amalekites, and Ammonites. God raised up the judge Ehud, who made a short sword and he hid it in his leg. He gained an audience with King Eglon, and when no one was there, he drove the sword into Eglon's stomach. King Eglon ended up dying in a very strange and disgusting way. From the 3rd chapter of Judges, verses 21 through 25. And Ehud put forth his left hand and took the dagger from his right thigh and thrust it into his belly with such force that the haft went in after the blade into the wound and was closed up with the abundance of fat, so that he did not draw out the dagger but left it in his body as he had struck it in. And forthwith, by the secret parts of nature, the excrements of his belly came out. But Ehud, carefully shutting the door of the parlor and locking them, went out by the postern door. And the king's servants going in saw the doors of the parlor shut, and they said, "Perhaps he is easy nature in his summer parlor." And waiting a long time till they were ashamed, and seeing that no man opened the door, they took a key, and opening they found their lord lying dead on the ground. The story of the judge Jephthah. A judge is raised up by God to defend the Israelites against the Ammonites. The judge, Jephthah, made a vow that after he defeated the Ammonites, he will make a burnt offering or a sacrifice of whatever comes out of his house first. When Jephthah returned home, his only child, his daughter, came out of his house. He fulfilled his vow to the Lord only after letting his daughter spend 2 months to bewail her virginity before she was offered as a holocaust to the Lord. This story is very strange because the Lord expressly forbids human sacrifice. Now, it is not known if this story is to be taken literally or if he offered her up in a symbolic way by requiring her to remain a virgin her whole life. But either way, she could no longer have children and she bewailed her virginity. From the 11th chapter of Judges, verses 30 through 31. He made a vow to the Lord, saying, "If thou wilt deliver the children of Ammon into my hands, whosoever shall come forth out of the doors of my house first, and shall meet me when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, the same will I offer a holocaust to the Lord." And then from the 11th chapter of Judges, verses 34 through 37. And when Jephthah returned into Maspha to his house, his only daughter met him with timbrels and with dances, for he had no other children. And when he saw her, he rent his garments and said, "Alas, my daughter, thou hast deceived me, and thou thyself art deceived. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I can do no other thing." And she answered him, "My father, if thou hast opened thy mouth to the Lord, do unto me whatsoever thou hast promised, since the victory hath been granted to thee, and revenge of thy enemies." And she said to her father, "Grant me only this which I desire. Let me go, that I may go about the mountains for 2 months, and may bewail my virginity with my companions." And from the 11th chapter of Judges, verse 39. And the 2 months being expired, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she knew no man. The story of Samson. The story of Samson is very well known. He is a Nazirite and can't do certain things as part of his vow to God. If his hair is cut, he will lose all his strength. In the story of Samson, he kills a lion with his bare hands. Upon his return, he finds a beehive in the lion's mouth. He takes honey from the hive and eats it. He also uses a jawbone of a donkey to kill 1,000 Philistines. Then, God removes a tooth from the jawbone, and a torrent of water comes out so Samson can drink. Samson's weakness is lust of women, and throughout the text, he is marrying or lying with various women. At one point, he is living in a cave near Etam. Finally, Samson is tricked by Delilah. The Philistines blind him, and at the end, Samson kills his enemies by collapsing their temple on them. And then the story of Gideon. The story of Gideon takes place when the Israelites were oppressed by the Midianites. Gideon is raised up, and God says that Gideon has too many men for the battle. So God instructs Gideon to watch his men while they drink water from the pond. Those men that put their head in the water like an animal are to be sent home. Those men who take water in their hand and bring it up to their mouth are to be taken to confront the Midianites. Gideon ends up with only 300 men. He tricks the Midianites into thinking that their force is much larger by breaking clay pots, blowing horns, and lighting torches. The Midianites flee in terror. In commemoration of his victory, Gideon makes a golden priestly ephod, or a priestly garment. But after his death, the Israelites end up worshiping that gold priestly garment. From the 7th chapter of Judges, verses 5 to 7, "And when the people were come down to the waters, the Lord said to Gideon, They that shall lap up the water with their tongues, as dogs are wont to lap, thou shalt set apart by themselves. But they that shall drink, bowing down their knees, shall be on the other side. And the number of them that had lapped water, casting it with the hand to their mouth, was 300 men. And all the rest of the multitude had drunk kneeling. And the Lord said to Gideon, By the 300 men that lapped water, I will save you, and deliver Midian into thy hand. But let all the rest of the people return to their place." And from the 8th chapter of Judges, verses 26 to 27, "And the weight of the earlets that he requested was 1,700 sickles of gold, besides the ornaments, and jewels, and purple raiment, which the kings of Midian were wont to use, and besides the golden chains that were about the camels' necks. And Gideon made an ephod thereof, and he put it in the city of Ephraim. And all Israel committed fornication with it, and it became a ruin to Gideon and to all his house." And finally, it is worth noting that the story of Ruth takes place during the period of the Judges. A future video will explore the amazing parallels between the book of Ruth and the conversion of King Clovis. Ruth is the great-great-grandmother of King David, who founded the great Davidic kingdom. Ruth was a Moabite, but she converted to Judaism. The story of Ruth revolves around the issues of marriage, inheritance, and her conversion from the Moabite religion. Without Ruth converting and marrying Boaz, King David would have never been born. There are more stories from the book of the Judges that have parallels in the time of the Church Fathers, but they aren't included in this video due to its length. Now that we have some of the stories from the time of Israel's judges in place, we can move on to the stories from the time of the Church Fathers. This video is not meant to give a comprehensive list of the early Church Fathers, or the councils, or the early heresies. Only the elements of this period that are relevant to the purpose of this video are included. After Constantine legalized Christianity in 313 AD, the Church was free to discuss and practice the faith in the open. The early Church was centered in various sees, with the See of Constantinople, the See of Antioch, the See of Rome, and the See of Alexandria holding primary importance. Most doctrine was not established yet, and major questions loomed about the nature of Christ, free will, Our Lady, among many other issues. Because Christian doctrine was largely unestablished, bishops in their different sees taught what they thought was best. Many disputes arose between various bishops concerning theological issues. Bad teachings arose in various parts of the Church and in various times. These heresies, at times, threatened the Church's very existence, as the true faith was often a minority. God raised up saints to defend against these heresies. There were many heresies that plagued the early Church. Among them were Arianism, Nestorianism, Gnosticism, Pelagianism, Monophysitism, Montanism, Modalism, Iconoclasm, and many more. These early saints are called the Church Fathers. There are many well-known Church Fathers and some who are not so well-known. Among the list of the Church Fathers are St. Athanasius, St. Cyril of Alexandria, St. Augustine, St. Ambrose, St. John of Damascus, Origen, St. Jerome, Tertullian, St. Irenaeus, St. Polycarp, and many more. There was a definite cycle in this period of church history. A heresy would arise and threaten the true faith. A saint would be raised up to defend against this heresy, and a council would be called to denounce it. However, soon another heresy would arise, oftentimes in the opposite theological direction. Another saint would be raised up, and it would start all over again. Here are some of the Church Fathers. St. Jerome. A future video will be made that shows all the amazing parallels between Samson and St. Jerome, including how they both lived in a cave, how they both had a weakness for women, although St. Jerome did not succumb to his weakness, and they both have a story about a lion and a donkey with water, and much more. Origen. Origen was an early church father who was an avid defender of the faith and a great writer. Origen took literally the words of Christ about self-castration and making yourself a eunuch. However, in some of his writings, Origen taught things against the faith. For this reason, even though he is a church father, he is not considered a saint. From Wikipedia, teaching throughout the day, he devoted the greater part of the night to the study of the Bible and lived a life of rigid asceticism. Eusebius reports that Origen, following Matthew 19 verse 12, literally castrated himself. Saints Ambrose, St. John Chrysostom, and St. John of Damascus. All three of these church fathers are known specifically for having a honey and or a golden mouth. From Wikipedia for St. Ambrose, there is a legend that as an infant, a swarm of bees settled on his face while he lay in his cradle, leaving behind a drop of honey. His father considered this a sign of his future eloquence and honeyed tongue. St. John of Damascus, also known as John Damascene, or as Chrysohoros, literally streaming with gold, or the golden speaker, from 675 or 676 to 4th of December 749 AD. He was a Syrian monk and a priest, born and raised in Damascus. He died at his monastery, Marsaba, near Jerusalem. And then St. John Chrysostom, Archbishop of Constantinople, was an important early church father. He is known for his preaching and public speaking, his denunciation of abuse of authority by both ecclesiastical and political leaders, and divine liturgy of St. John Chrysostom and his aesthetic sensibilities. The epitaph Christosomos, anglicized by Chrysostom, means golden mouth in Greek and denotes his celebrated eloquence. Now here are some of the early heresies. Arianism, the belief that Jesus was not God, but a creation of God. Bishop Arius was the founder of this heresy, which greatly oppressed the church. Bishop Arius met a very untimely death as he was going to Constantinople. He went into a bathhouse to relieve himself. In the process of his time in the bathroom, his bowels all spilled out. He died there on the bathroom floor. Arianism was condemned as a heresy at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. 318 bishops attended, although many more were invited. The initial vote against Arianism was 301 to 17. From Wikipedia, as he approached the place called Constantine's Forum, where the column of porphyry is erected, a terror arising from the remorse of conscience seized Arius, and with the terror a violent relaxation of the bowels. He therefore inquired whether there was a convenient place near, and being directed to the back of Constantine's Forum, he hastened thither. Soon after a faintness came over him, and together with the evacuations his bowels protruded, followed by a copious hemorrhage and the descent of the smaller intestines. Moreover, portions of his spleen and liver were brought off in the effusion of blood, so that he almost immediately died. And concerning the Council of Nicaea, Constantine had invited all 1,800 bishops of the Christian Church within the Roman Empire, but a smaller and unknown number attended. Eusebius of Caesarea counted more than 250. Athanasius of Alexandria counted 318, estimated about 270. Later, Socrates Scholasticus recorded more than 300, and Evagrius, Hilary of Poitiers, Jerome, Dionysius Exiguus, and Rufinus recorded 318. This number, 318, is preserved in the liturgies of the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria. The heresy of Pelagianism, the rejection of original sin and of concupiscence. Pelagianism taught that mankind can save itself by striving of its own strength and virtue, and that Christ's sacrifice was just an example for us to follow. From Wikipedia, Pelagianism is the belief that original sin did not taint human nature, and that mortal will is still capable of choosing good or evil without special divine aid. Pelagianism has come to be identified with the view that human beings can earn salvation by their own efforts. He taught that the human will, as created with its abilities by God, was sufficient to live a sinless life. And then the heresy of Iconoclasm. This heresy developed at the end of the period of the Church Fathers in the 8th century. It was largely centered in the Byzantine Empire. This heresy taught that it was wrong to have images of our Lord, or other holy images. It broke, burnt, and smashed holy images, accusing the faithful of worshiping them instead of God. From Wikipedia, Byzantine iconoclasm refers to two periods in the history of the Byzantine Empire, when the use of religious images or icons was opposed by religious and imperial authorities within the Eastern Church and the temporal imperial hierarchy. The first iconoclasm, as it is sometimes called, lasted between about 726 and 787 AD. And finally, it's worth noting that during this period of church history, in the latter part of the 5th century, the Frankish king Clovis converted from Arianism to Christianity at the request of his wife, Saint Clotilda. Clovis united the French tribes under one king, and then established the Salic laws, which resolved the issues of intermarriage and inheritance that were caused by the unification of the Frankish tribes. It is because of Clovis and his conversion that Charlemagne would rise in the Frankish realm and become the founder of the Holy Roman Empire. A future video will explore the amazing parallels between the Book of Ruth and the conversion of Clovis. After the Israelites were free from slavery in Egypt, they came into the Promised Land, and the Israelites had to face many enemies in their land. At different times and places, their enemies would rise up and oppress them. God commanded the Israelites to kill all their enemies and make no compromises with them, lest Israel start to worship false gods. After the church came out of the Roman persecution and Christianity became legal, the church had to face an onslaught of many heresies that arose. At different times and in different places of the church, influential heresies and heretics would rise up, often oppressing the church. The church could not allow the true faith to be tainted with heresy, and no compromise could be made with heresies or heretics. During the period of the Judges, there was no king yet in Israel. There was no central government and no precedent as to how they should conduct themselves in their new land. The different tribes all did what they thought was best in their own eyes. The judges were raised up as defenders and as examples of how to live and believe. During the period of the Church Fathers, Christian doctrine was largely unestablished, and the various bishops of the world had no precedent on how they should teach about Christ or many other aspects of the faith. Each bishop taught and did what he thought was best. Some of these bishops fell into heresy, which eventually spread and threatened the true faith. The Church Fathers were raised up as defenders of the true faith and as examples of holiness. A cycle persisted in which the Israelites fell into idolatry. Their enemies oppressed them, and a judge was raised up to deliver them. And they lived in a period of peace, only to follow the same cycle all over again. During this process, God allowed them to be opposed by their enemies in order to instill in them a deep desire to firmly possess and sharpen their faith in the Lord and in His laws. A cycle persisted in the time of the Church Fathers, in which a heresy would arise and be anathematized at a council. A time of peace and true belief followed, only to have another heresy arise on the heels of the last one. Church Fathers would arise to combat the heresy, only to have the cycle repeated again. During this process, God allowed the church to be tested by these heresies in order to sharpen Christian doctrine and to be guided by the Holy Spirit to develop the teachings of the Catholic Church. Jephthah made an impetuous vow to God that after his victory, he would sacrifice the first thing that came out of his house. His only child came out first, and he followed through on his vow to God. This left him without any children, and his daughter also bewailed her virginity and that she would never have any children. Because of this, even though Jephthah is still considered a judge, there is a negative connotation connected with him. Origen made an oath to God to remain celibate. He made a hasty decision to castrate himself. Because of this, it was certain that he would never have any children. Even though Origen is considered a church father for the wealth of his teachings, there is a negative connotation associated with him since some of his writings were heretical. In the story of Samson, he killed a lion with his bare hands. Upon his return, he found a beehive inside the lion's mouth, which produced honey. There are at least 3 church fathers that are said to have either a golden mouth or honey tongues: St. Ambrose, St. John Chrysostom, and St. John of Damascus. King Eglon, the Moabite king who was oppressing Israel, died at the hand of the judge Ehud. Ehud buried a sword in his stomach, which caused all his bowels and intestines to come out of his secret parts. Ehud closed the doors, so it seemed like King Eglon was relieving himself in the bathroom. Arianism was oppressing the church and was led by the bishop Arius. Arius stepped into a bathroom in Constantinople to relieve himself when his bowels and organs all came out suddenly. He died on the floor of a public bathroom. After Gideon defeated the Midianites, he made a golden priestly garment as a way to commemorate his victory. After his death, however, Israel took the golden priestly garment and started to worship it instead of using it for its rightful purpose. In the 8th century, a heresy arose in the Byzantine Empire called Iconoclasm. Certain abuses were present in which people ascribed almost magical properties to certain icons. However, the Byzantines overreacted by imposing another heresy in which they destroyed all holy images and they emptied their churches of their beauty. In the story of Gideon, God instructed Gideon to watch his many men to see who freely chose to drink out of the water like an animal, and who freely chose to drink with their hands, more like a human. Only 300 men freely chose to drink out of their hands, and they were kept to fight the Midianites. The rest were sent home. To prove to the Israelites that God saves them and not themselves, God won a victory over the Midianites with only 300 men, and he saved Israel from their enemy. The heresy of Pelagianism had the wrong concept of free will and of original sin. The heresy denied that men would act in base and evil ways without the grace of God. Therefore, the heresy argued that man was capable of saving himself by his own actions, and that it was not an act of God.